If you've ever booked a quote-unquote luxury pet resort only to come home to find out that your dog is so stressed out and hoarse they can't even bark anymore, or your cat now acts like you've ruined their lives and they're making you pay for it, or if you've ever just really worried about what really happens when you leave your pet at a boarding facility, I can tell you from personal experience, you should be. We're going to break down how to find a place that's not just convenient for you, but one that's truly safe, that is run in a professional manner, and is a good fit for your pet's personality. So stay tuned. You've reached the Pet Parent Hotline, your lifeline to practical solutions for your toughest pet parenting challenges. I'm your host, Amy Castro, and I'm here to help you cut through the noise and turn expert advice into step-by-step strategies so you can stop chasing your tail and start enjoying life with pets again. Welcome back to the Pet Parent Hotline. I'm your host, Amy Castro, as you already know. And if you've ever tried to plan a vacation, you know just how stressful it can be to figure out what you're going to do with your pets. In fact, I will tell you that I have not taken a vacation with my entire family, with the exception of a few trips in our travel trailer where we could take our pets with us. Because having worked at 2 different boarding facilities when I was younger, I'm scared, to be perfectly honest, because the one facility was fantastic. What you saw when you toured was what you got when you weren't there watching everybody. If you paid for extra playtime, your pet got extra playtime. The other facility was 180 degrees the opposite. I won't go into the details, but I wouldn't have left my shoes there overnight, let alone left one of my pets. And we've all probably seen the headlines of pets who have been lost, pets who have been gravely ill in the care of boarding facilities. And that's why I wanted to do this episode. I wanted to make sure that you knew from an insider's perspective what you need to be looking for to choose a safe, trustworthy place where your pet is going to be cared for just as well as they would be at home. And so to help us sort through what really matters when choosing a boarding facility, I'm joined by CARMEN RUSTENBECK, founder and CEO of the International Boarding and Pet Services Association. CARMEN has spent more than a decade leading the way in setting professional standards and best practices for pet care facilities around the world. And through IBPSA, she's helped create training programs and certifications that have really raised the bar for pet care quality and safety. And that's exactly the kind of insider expertise I felt like we needed to have on the show today. CARMEN, I'm so glad to have you here today. Thank you for coming on our show.
Thank you, Amy. It is so exciting to be on your show. I don't think I've ever been on your show before, and so I'm just excited about that.
Yeah, well, and no, you haven't, but now that I've got a hold of you, I'm going to get my hooks in you and get you back here for some other things. I've already got the wheels turning, but I had been wanting to do this episode because whether it's daycare, boarding, a pet sitter, and, you know, we could probably talk about all of those things, but whether it's holidays, summer vacations, or an emergency trip, knowing that you have a boarding facility that you can trust, I think is super important for pet parents, and it's not a good position to be in trying to make these decisions at the last minute. So before we get into the step-by-step how to sort through things, yes, what do you think are some of the maybe biggest mistakes that pet parents might make when it comes to looking for a facility or choosing a facility?
So I think there's 2 important things that pet parents really need to think about when looking and choosing. One of them is, what does your city, county, or state have for regulations around boarding and daycare? We assume that there are, but the reality is across America, there's not. So you have to look at each state to find out. Like Colorado, they have a lot of regulation. They have a lot of standards that have to be met, but in New Mexico, they don't. So each state is on its own. And then sometimes you'll find areas, pockets of cities or counties that have restricted, like pet sitters. Sometimes pet sitters are restricted in certain cities and counties in Texas. So it's real important that first you understand what your state provides. Then the second thing is that you must think of a pet care center like you would think of a child care center. So we really want to be thorough in our investigation before we hire that company to take care of our pet, just like we would do for our child.
Yes, I've often felt like it's the same thing. One of the reasons we got a travel trailer, to be honest, was to evacuate from hurricanes. But it was always separate vacations. Like I would take a vacation and leave my family behind because I just didn't feel comfortable leaving my pets. And part of that is because I've worked in a facility a million years ago, actually two facilities. One was awesome. And then the other facility, I won't even get into the details, but what you saw was a facade that they showed you, and then all kind of not so great things happened when you weren't there. And so that's always really scared me with my own pets. So when researching a facility, I mean, I know people they'll go on Yelp or they'll go on Google, but where should they really start looking at first when pet parents are starting this search?
Well, I think it's always interesting to find out from friends and family if they've used a boarding facility. So, referrals are your best. That's what I tell our facility owners, referrals are the best. If you've done a great job, they're going to refer you. So that's sort of trustworthy. Then you could go to Google and see if they've got a 5-star rating, 4-star rating, what kind of positive and or negative or anything that's been said about them. But I think the first thing I look at also is I sort of do a drive-by, like I'm shopping for a house. I drive by. Do I like the way that facility looks? Is it clean on the outside? Is it landscaped well? Or does it look like, they're boarding in the barn on the back 50, which may be a great barn on the back 50, the first drive-by, I think that's what I really look for, this location and how it's maintained and fencing around it.
Yeah, that's a good point because, again, it could be that barn is the best place for your pet. But if it's not maintained, like to me, I used to have a client in my business that would, while a person was at a job interview, they would send an employee out to look in their car. Because he had this really strong belief that how you maintained your car, whether you had it, look like a garbage dump on the inside or whether it was moderately neat, was a reflection of the kind of person you are. And I think that's true. Do you have pride in the facility and how it's maintained? Is maintenance and keeping things nice just not even a priority? So what else isn't a priority?
Right, exactly.
Yeah. So that's the kind of drive-by. I like that idea of the drive-by because I think we don't necessarily listen to our guts enough. And I remember, just like you had said with the daycare, I remember going and visiting daycares that people recommended. And I thought, my gosh, I wouldn't leave my pet here. I got a bad vibe on the way things are. So I think part of that point, too, is, everybody has different standards. And so just because a friend or a relative says this is the best place doesn't mean it's going to meet your standards. You need to make that decision to feel good with it, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. So when I do that drive-by, that's my first impression of the facility, right? And so then, of course, we take the next step, which is we call and talk to them. And then we see if we can have an interview and we don't take our pet. We say, I want to come in. I want to see the facility. You want to talk to the general manager or whoever's taking care of the pets. Sometimes the owners don't have a general manager. Sometimes there's such a large facility that you never quite make it to the general manager. Maybe you just make it to a manager, but at least you get to see the facility and experience the inside of the facility and what that looks like.
Now, what about facilities? Because in doing my research for this episode, I did come across some facilities who basically did not do tours, and they had lots of reasons for it, from it's inconvenient and it disrupts our day to it stresses out the animals when somebody comes through. Should that be a red flag? Or if they say, oh, we've got a video tour or we've got these pictures we can show you, does that substitute for actually going and seeing the facility?
I consider it a red flag. I think there's pride of ownership involved when you can go and you can see a facility, and you don't have to see everything in the facility. But if you're going to be boarding your dog, you should be able to see the enclosure types that your dog will be boarded in. If your pet's going to participate in daycare, because we even have daycare for cats now. So if we are participating in daycare, well, what does that look like? And then that's when we start after we see, then we can start asking more deeper and more relevant questions just beyond, okay, I've seen it. I've walked in the front front door. It smells good. And if you are a pet parent that knows anything about Fear Free program, you can go check that out at fearfree.com. They have a pet parent program just for you. We use the Fear Free options within our veterinarian facilities and in our boarding facilities. So when you're looking at the Fear Free concept, when I walk in, is there anything that would make my pet scared if they were in this building? And what might that be? And so that helps you sort of work through the process of how do you think your pet's going to respond in the facility based on environment, quality of materials, whether it be flooring or enclosures, or how they divide up play groups. So all of these things are important for you to know.
Yeah. As far as doing some of those assessments along the way, the idea of what might make your pet fearful, because I've seen everything, like the one facility that I did leave my personal pets at, it was a smaller facility, even though it was probably 3/4 or more full of dogs. It was quiet, and the layout was such that it kind of allowed for that a little bit more. Now, I know, and I think pet parents need to realize too, is that, everything's not going to be perfect. Dogs poop, and so, you might see a cage that has poop in it and not to freak out. But, from that facility to another facility that was like a giant warehouse with 100 kennels inside, and it was the volume, I couldn't stand it myself. And so I know that my dog would have just been totally freaked out by that. Is that important to really assess the fit for your pet? Because there are so many different types of facilities.
Yes, absolutely. And I would say that if you're in a facility and the dogs are just barking all the time, that the care that needs to be happening with those pets is not happening. It's not that dogs don't bark. It's just that when they are calm and when they are comfortable and when they are enjoying, even when they're in play, there's not a lot of barking going on sometimes. I mean, they can be calm and playing and having a great time in play groups. And when they're in their enclosures, if they're barking, we need to identify why is that dog barking. And so I am looking for action by the employees that they are attending to the pets, even those that are a little bit fearful or having a problem and they're barking. And so let's go find out why that dog is barking. What's the problem? So these are things that the more you explore different facilities, you learn how things are done. Each facility is very, very different. And so finding that right facility for your pet is really, really important.
Yeah. And I think that kind of goes back to why going and seeing it yourself is so important. Other than the things that you've mentioned so far, as I'm touring through the facility, are there other things? Because some of the things that I hadn't thought about, I had thought about my pet's peace of mind when I was looking, but I didn't necessarily think about things like physical safety. I know that sounds really dumb, but like, how good is that fence, or is there a hole at the bottom? What kinds of things like that should we be watching for?
So if you're outdoors, you're going to be looking for fences that are high enough that a dog cannot jump over, climb over. Sometimes you'll see a 2-fence system where the inside fence is like 6 feet, the next fence is 8 feet. But you're also going to see when the dogs are in play groups, are they just out there running free, or is there somebody out there actually helping the dogs have proper play? So if you start seeing a dog running a fence line, we might have a challenge trying to figure its way out, right? And you know what? It could be really simple. I have a Labrador. His name's Java. He's now 13 years old. When we got him when he was 3, that dog could jump a 6-foot fence without even thinking about it. It was the most craziest thing. I'm like, I'm sorry, you Labrador or Greyhound? What are you? Because he would literally go up to it and just jump over. So it was sort of a challenge putting him in boarding because we had to tell them if he wants out, he's just going to jump over the fence.
Going for it.
Right. So you just have to be aware, but you should see that those fences are in good repair and that there's a double lock system on the gates coming in and out. So you just don't go through one gate and then they're free. No, there's like an area where they're contained and then there's a second gate for them to go to. That cuts down all kinds of problems. The other thing I think is that you need to be aware of concrete flooring. So if you have an older pet, so we call them geriatric once they hit 7 years old. Even though we have dogs living to 15, 17, 18 years old, we still call a dog geriatric once they hit 7. The older a dog gets, the harder it is for them to stabilize on slippery surfaces. So you need to know how comfortable your dog is on different surfaces. So if you walk into a facility and it's all concrete and you see that your dog's going to be unstable on that, you might need to find a different kind of facility to keep your pet in. You find a pet sitter to take care of your dog at home. So these are the kinds of things you need to look at when you're thinking about your dog and the safety of your dog in a facility, down to what kind of bedding are they letting the dog sleep on? Is that bedding safe? If your dog's a dog that likes to tear things up, is that a type of bedding he would tear up? So all these things you need to consider.
Yeah. I would guess that the vast majority of people are boarding dogs, not cats, but I know there is cat boarding. Are there specific things we might want to be looking for there?
Yeah, so when we look at boarding of cats, we actually have some facilities that's all they do is feline boarding. But in a normal boarding facility with cats, they have the enclosure that they stay in. We want to make sure that the enclosure is large enough where they go to their litter box, that is separate from where they would sleep and be able to play. Also, that they have time out of that smaller area to a larger area where maybe they can climb, you can play with them a little bit, they can chase, whatever your cat likes to do, that they have an area they can go and have some playtime while that little enclosure is being cleaned, and then they're back in the enclosure. And that's really all based on the size of the facility and how much room they have in their feline area to build. But a lot of facilities are really looking to see how they can increase the interaction with cats. So for instance, I have this one facility that is in the Northwest, and she rented an office in a strip mall, and she put in little 5-foot greenhouses, a whole bunch of 5-foot greenhouses. And each greenhouse is a cat enclosure, and they put a bed, a rocking chair. So it looks like a little bedroom. And then when they're cleaning those enclosures, they take that cat and they have 2 rooms. One is for climbers and the other one is for cats that don't like to climb. So whichever kind of cat experience that cat likes, they put it in there while they clean out that entire enclosure, and then they bring the cat back. But they also had fish tanks so the cats could look out their little windows in their enclosure and they could see the fish. They had birds, they could listen to the birds. So there was all kinds of things to keep those cats involved. Well, you get that same experience in a smaller setting where maybe each enclosure is divided by a built-in fish tank. So you have all kinds of things to keep the cats active, to keep them entertained mentally, and not just sitting in an enclosure. So depending on how active your cat is how you're going to look for the type of enclosure and the type of amenities, if we can call it that your cat can experience while in boarding.
That's a good point, because I know that having run a rescue, we kind of operate in a similar fashion as far as the layout and letting animals out, things like that. And there are some cats that, despite the fact that the kennel door is open, they have no desire to come out. They're just like chilling up there, or they'll get down and then they'll just sit. And then some of them, as soon as that door opens, they're flying out, running around the room, like little maniacs. And so that is a good point to know your own cat's personality and what's going to make them happy and enriched or just relaxed while you're gone, for sure. What other things, so you talked about some safety standards and fencing and things like that. As I'm going through and maybe I'm meeting people or I'm being toured by somebody, are there things about them or anything else about the facility that we should be either questioning or that might be potential red flags?
Yeah, so I'm going to be asking them, can you talk to me about what kind of training you have? Where did you receive your training from? Are you animal CPR certified, first aid certified? And where did you get that certification from? Depending on where the facility is located, in which part of the world, I might be asking questions like, it's hurricane season and I'm in Louisiana. It's hurricane season. What is your safety evacuation plan? Do you have one of those? What kind of contracts am I signing? What's in that contract? Do I have to leave a credit card on file with a credit card limit in case my pet is hurt while in care? So there's all kinds of questions you're asking about the people who are providing care. You want to make sure they are getting training. It is a mistake to think that people have been trained for pet care. Now, they could have received training where we're going to OJT, on the job training, but they might have received training from someplace else. It is also important to know that in the United States, the closest thing we have to pet boarding and daycare training at a college level is a companion animal program. But even companion animal programs do not train at the level that we need training in a boarding and daycare facility. So you might ask them, are you a member of IBPSA? Because IBPSA has certifications for boarding for dogs and cats and birds and rabbits and ferrets and reptiles. And so anything that can be boarded, we have a training program on to meet the industry standard for that. Also, there's other training programs out there. And then if they have been trained, are those certificates hanging on the wall somewhere? Are they proud of the training that they're getting their employees? And you can ask to see their safety evacuation plan. What happens if you have to evacuate or you can't evacuate and you have to shelter in place? What does that look like if you're living in Texas and it's tornado season? And don't be afraid to ask if you don't understand something, say, can you explain that to me? So that's the best way.
Yeah. I'm a big believer in certification and obviously in training. That's my, that's my business for humans. But there are people that you're going to run across that will say, oh, I don't need that, or that's not required, or whatever the case may be. Right. And they have a lot of reasons. Yes. But to me, experience is one thing, education is something else. And so the person that takes the time, I was just looking at some training because I have some dog behavioral training, very little. Yes. And I thought, oh, maybe I should pursue blah, blah, blah. And it was like 300 hours of hands-on and this, that. That, to me, shows a level of commitment to your craft, whatever your craft may be, or a level of care for the animals that are in your charge to go through that level of training. So I think it's definitely something we should be looking at. And the CPR, that was another thing that I never thought about, was the pet CPRs. And, I mean, there couldn't be anything much more important than that, I don't think.
Right. I think it's really important, yes, that people understand that there are these certification programs out there, that there are training programs. And I do agree with you that when we are in our craft, whatever our craft is, that we continue to educate ourselves, whether that's by going to conferences, doing third-party certification where we have to have continuing education units, whatever that is, that we never stop learning in our craft. And especially in pet care, whether it's medical or non-medical, which is what we have in pet boarding and daycare, is that we are always learning new things about the pets, even on the veterinarian side. So we can't just stop, say, okay, I know everything I need to know. No, we will never stop learning. The more that science moves us forward, the more we see science-backed education, I think it's imperative that those of us who are pet care service providers, we continue to train.
We'll be right back.
Can we be real for a second? Vet bills can be brutal. One unexpected visit, and suddenly you're choosing between paying your rent or paying for your pet's care. That's exactly why I created the Vet Bill Survival Kit. It's free, and inside you'll find 10 proven ways to save money at the vet without shortchanging your pet. Download your kit today at petparenthotline.com/vetkit. That's petparenthotline.com/vetkit. Yeah, that is so true, because just because I worked at a boarding facility 30 years ago doesn't mean that I am qualified to do it now, for sure. So that's such a good point. As far as transparency goes, we talked about the importance and the red flag of not being able to see the facility. But I've run into a couple people who were like, I wouldn't stay at a facility if it didn't have cameras and I couldn't watch my pets 24/7, or getting updates from the facility. Should I be expecting a daily and hourly report card or something like that?
So I think the camera situation is sort of challenging because they're very expensive to put in and to keep working. And so sometimes it's a monetary thing that's happening there with cameras. I know that some facilities, especially in their feline, they have cameras that you can log in to where your cat is being kept, and you can talk through the camera and you can play with the little laser dot.
Oh, wow.
And so you could play with your cat no matter where you are. If you can access online that camera, you could play with your cat. So that's sort of fun. So there are those kind. But my facility, they have cameras. My facility is what we're calling cage free. So the animals are divided by size and type and they stay in groups, but they are not in individual enclosures. So they have cameras that are positioned to see all the pets from all angles. So that really wouldn't help for me to have access to that. However, every time I board there, I get an update every day. Here's Java playing with his friends, and they send me pictures of the pets that he's playing with them. And so I do get that on my phone, and that comes out of the software they use. So they're able to take those pictures, load it up into the software, send it to the pet parents, no matter where they are, right to their phones. And then when I pick Java up from boarding, I get a report card that tells me who gave him his meds, because my dog has to have meds twice a day. When he ate, he eats twice a day. When he evacuated, as in, peed and pooped, and what times those were, and it all looked good. They
It's
give
just
me
like
a
baby daycare for
yeah. Exactly. His eyes look good. His feet look good. We did what we call a snout to tail, which is just rubbing your hand over the dog, make sure you don't see anything. Please, they snout to tail went fine. So it gives me all this stuff that happened to Java while he was at the boarding facility for a period of time. So, and if I ever want to call in, I can call in and say, hey, can you tell me how Java did today? And it's right there on the computer for them to know.
Yeah, that's what I was just thinking. You can always call too if you feel like you need something more often. But I like that idea, because whether it's a group setting or they're in individual kennels, things can happen. I think back of my days volunteering at animal control, where it was like, if there wasn't any blood on the walls, you drop the food and you go on about your business kind of thing. And of course, that's not a boarding facility, but it could easily be that way, where it's like, hey, I clean the cage, I put down the food, I take up the bowl, and not really having hands on with the animal. But that is important to just give everybody the once over and make sure nothing happened overnight or whatever the case may be.
Exactly.
Which brings me to the question about overnight. And I know that you're going to provide us with a link at the end with a lot of resource information that kind of goes over this and more. But do you think it's important to have a person physically on location overnight, or are there other alternatives that would be sufficient if something happens in the middle of the night?
I think that the standard is that we would want somebody on site overnight. I understand the challenge of that, as in the cost to have somebody stay overnight. Sometimes, depending on where you are in the United States and what your minimum wage is, it becomes very prohibitive. However, if you are a cage-free boarding facility, you have to have somebody in overnight, because anything could happen. But for those that don't, usually what they have is they have cameras. If there's movement, that they send a signal out, or if there's a fire, that goes right to the fire station. So there's all kinds of things that would help mitigate any things that happen overnight. But traditionally, they have not had somebody watching them overnight. But more and more people are saying we're moving to somebody being on site overnight, or at least we have somebody till 10 o'clock and then somebody's there at 5 in the morning.
So the window's smaller.
Smaller opportunity there for something to happen. But it is to the point of emergency. What happens? You also need to ask, if something happens to my pet, how long before you call me? What happens in that process? So ask them the steps. Do you call my vet? Do you take them to the vet? How does that work out? So make sure you understand those steps.
Yeah, that's a good point. I was thinking before, when you had mentioned something about that, I think I would want to know, let's say it was an emergency in the middle of the night. Where would you take my pet if my vet's not an overnight vet?
Right.
What is the emergency clinic that you'd go to, and am I comfortable with that one? I think another question would be, if they didn't have somebody there overnight, I would want to know who's going to respond if something happens on that camera, and how far away do they live? I don't think I'd want them living an hour and a half away.
Absolutely. It could be a real challenge. And to the point of how important it is to understand what the process is. I have a facility in Texas that ended up flooding twice, even after they were told they were never going to be in a flood zone. The first
you can't
time
believe that. I live in Texas.
Right. So the fire department came and said, oh, you're too high up on this hill. It's never going to flood. Anyway, the facility ended up flooding, and they had a person who was there overnight, and she literally put the dogs on top of the enclosures, and it was up to her armpits. When the manager finally made it to her, it was because there was flooding everywhere, but she saved all those animals by staying with them, putting the pets on top of the enclosures, and her cell phone died like 5 minutes before the manager got there. but it caused them to rethink their emergency action plan in a flood. And 2 years later, it flooded again. But I think that's the kind of care we want to see. No matter what's happening, how quickly can you get there and how quickly can it be remedied before loss of life happens with pets?
Yeah. Yeah, I can picture that so well because I've lived through it. When I volunteered at animal control, I lived right across the street from the facility, and there was a couple of days during, I think it was during Ike or Harvey, one or the other, where the people that worked there couldn't drive in because the roads were so flooded. So, we waded over in our boots. I could have taken my canoe to get over there, but I was able to get over there and care for the animals. Luckily, the facility didn't flood, but nobody could get there except me. So it was a little bit crazy. So beyond kind of the transparency, the walkthrough, and again, just to remind everybody to make sure to listen for that link at the end for more information, what can I start doing to prepare my pet? And I don't want to go too far into like mentally preparing my pet per se for being away from me, because I think we could do a whole episode on that. But I know one of the things that comes to mind is this idea of, if I bring all my pet stuff, they're going to be so much happier. And I remember working at the kennel and thinking, oh gosh, please don't bring all your stuff because now I have to be responsible for it.
Right.
Your 50 king-size bedspreads, we're going to have to wash them every day. And, there's got to be a happy medium there as far as preps. And then you also had mentioned too that all this visiting that we've been talking about is just us. At some point, do we bring our pet to visit? Let's talk about that first.
Yeah. So once you find a facility that you're comfortable with, now the next thing you're going to do is schedule a visit with your pet. They're going to make you schedule a visit with your pet anyway, especially if you want daycare, because they have to look at your pet and see how your pet responds in a daycare situation. So it's usually a couple of hours. So you bring your pet into the facility. Now you're going to watch how your pet's reacting to the entryway, the facility, the people, and your pet doesn't know how to lie. I tell pet parents this all the time. Your pet will respond exactly the way they're feeling. So if your pet is hiding behind you, doesn't want to go to the person who's calling to them, whatever, you have to decide, is it because your pet normally does this, they're shy, or is this new environment? So am I going to work with my pet for a little bit to see if Java will go or not? So just be paying attention to pet body language. Get to know your pet in different environments and how your pet responds. That'll make you much smarter. Quickly identify whether we're just scared a little bit or we really don't like this place. And there could be some crazy reason that we would never be able to identify. So, it's not bad on the facility if you cannot get your pet to go. That just means there's something there that your pet didn't like.
It's not a fit.
So,
yeah,
right. For whatever reason. So remember, you're choosing like a childcare center, but at the same time, you're sort of doing that real estate look also. So sometimes you really like the house on the outside. You get in, you're like, yeah, no, it's not for me, but you can't really pinpoint. So we do that same thing with our pet. So let's say your pet's like, okay, I'm in. So then they take your pet, they do the 2-hour evaluation on your pet, and then you come back and they'll say, yes, your pet's a great fit, or your pet's going to need to work a little bit to go into daycare, but we would still love to have them for boarding. So they'll be really honest with you about that. And if you really want them to have the daycare experience, there's other things they can do. They can do private sessions with your pet, but they'll want to work with your pet so that they will come to daycare, because that's the ultimate, to get your dog to be, or your cat to go to daycare and have some playtime.
Yeah.
So they'll work on that. But now you've taken your pet, they've done the evaluation. It's great. Now you need to schedule an overnight one when you're in town. Now I'm going to put my dog in or my cat in overnight one time just to see how that goes. It is.
I got to be thinking in advance, not a week before my vacation.
Right. No, you need to be like, let's talk about the holiday time frame. Most people are like, oh, Thanksgiving isn't for 4 weeks, I'll wait. Or Christmas isn't for 4 or 5 weeks, I'll wait. October, they're already booking out. So that means if you're planning to be gone over the holidays and you can't take your pet in June, July, August, you want to be going through this process already. Now, depending on how many facilities are in your area, it might be a really short process. Or if you're like my friends in The Carolinas, my word, they've got a facility almost every mile. So you'd have a lot to choose from in the Carolinas. But out here
Good
in
point.
New Mexico, where I live, you only got 5 choices. So it's going to be a really short tour.
You better find what you love and book early.
Right, exactly.
Such a good point, too, because I would be concerned. I'm in the Houston metro area, so there's probably a lot. If I was willing to drive an hour or 45 minutes or whatever, there's a lot of facilities around. But the other thing I would think I'd be concerned about, if you are in a smaller place where there are fewer choices and you get closer to that time and there's just that one place that's got tons of openings, that would be a red flag to me. I'd be a little concerned. I mean, I guess it depends on your population and all of that.
Right.
But the point I'm trying to make is the good places are going to book early.
Yes, they will. Or the places that reputation precedes them will book book earlier. So anytime you're planning a vacation, you need to be on top of it. So I suggest start today. I don't care if you're not going to go on vacation in the next 3 months, or you're not leaving, just start today. Make the process easy, and let's see if your pet can be boarded or could go to daycare or what that looks like.
That's a good idea. And it's kind of like going to the vet, right? If you only go to the vet twice a year, then your animal's going to be freaked out about getting in the car or overly excited or whatever the case may be, and just have a different reaction at the vet. But if it's something more frequent, we did a recent episode on grooming. The groomer was saying, just come visit, because that way when they do need to be groomed, they're familiar with us. They know what it smells like. They know what it feels like. And so we're trying to do all of this so it is the least stressful experience for ourselves and our pets. And so one of the ways we can do that is by having those visits plenty in advance, and maybe do them more frequently. Maybe go to daycare even if you don't need it, assuming you can afford it, obviously.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what should I bring? I mean, I would assume that each facility is going to have rules as far as what you can and can't bring. I know that back in the day, the big thing was whether you brought your own food or whether you just fed the kibble or whatever that they feed there. What should pet parents consider on that front?
So the medicine that your pet may be on in their original pill boxes or whatever it is that shows that it's prescribed. And then if you're going to take your own food, please have it divided up. So for us, we use Ziploc baggies, and they know that Moose gets a Ziploc baggie in the morning and a Ziploc baggie at night. And that makes it real easy for them. And then I tell them what kind of food it is, just in case an emergency happens and we didn't make it back in time. But I make sure he's got enough food plus 1 extra day for emergencies. And I take that in a little container, so it has his name on it. Some people say, well, what about bedding or favorite toys? I would say talk to the facility, because most of the time they have special beds and special bedding for those beds. And if you bring in your stuff, it just makes it a lot more complicated. So talk to the facility about what they allow.
Right. And I would add to that, don't bring anything, not that people necessarily have like an heirloom dog toy, but if you've got a one of a kind, my dog can't live without this toy, and they don't make it anymore, don't bring anything you can't afford to lose, because I think that's asking a lot of the facility.
It is. That's why I say when it comes to anything else outside of food and medicine, I would be talking to the facility about what they provide.
All right. So we've covered a lot of ground, and any last things that pet parents should be aware of that will make this a successful experience for pet and person and the facility too?
Absolutely. Really, I want you to understand your contract that you're going to sign, understand everything that the contract says, ask questions if you don't, and then really understand the drop off and pickup times and any nap times that may be happening. Because what happens is if you drop off too early or you pick up too late, you might incur an extra charge. So you really want to make sure you understand what you're paying for, the times that you're paying for. My facility, they do nap time from 12 to 3. They turn the lights down, they turn the soft music up, and the pets are like, oh, it's time for a nap, and they all lay down. And so it's
just like kid daycare.
Right. So they don't do any drop off or pickup times between 12 and 3. I know that. So
and probably
I know,
not tours either, because that's
right,
the
no,
animal's time to
nothing
rest.
during that time, right, because that's the downtime for the pets. And so it's really important that you understand that. Some facilities will stay open later. Some facilities stay open over the week, and some say, you know what, we don't do drop-offs and pickups on Saturday, or we only do
Mhm.
them for a couple hours. So really understand those times and understand the charges if you have to extend or ask for a later pickup time. That's why I said I pack an extra day's food, because in today's market, what are the odds that your plane is going to get you back when it says it's going to get you back? The other day I
Yeah.
flew back from New Jersey. I arrived and I made it home, and it was 12 a.m. when I walked
Mm,
in my front door. There was no way I was picking Job up from the boarding facility at 12 a.m. So
right.
it's really important to understand, if you do get delayed, how you take care of that with your boarding facility.
Right. Carmen, thank you so much for being here with us today and sharing all of your wisdom and expertise. This is a lot of information, and I had been alluding to the fact that you have a link to share with us, and I will put it in the show notes. But can you tell us about that resource that you have on your website for pet parents to kind of pull all this together?
Yes, so if you'll go to www.ibpsa.com, there is a tab on the front page, second tab from the left, that says for the pet parent. If you'll
Okay.
click on that tab, it has a document that you can download that will help you walk through how you're going to interview a facility or any pet care service provider. And I encourage you, as you're going through the process and you're using that document, that if something else comes to your mind, write it on there so that you'll
Mm.
have that question that got triggered at a facility for the next facility that you're going to go interview, or the next pet care service provider.
That's a good idea. Maybe if you're going to go visit 3 places, print out 3 separate documents and then take notes for each one so that it's all nice and clear, because it's a big decision. Thank you so much for the resources and for having an organization like IBPSA that pet parents and professionals can rely on for their growth and development and staying on the top of the latest and greatest.
Amy, thank you so much. I've enjoyed our conversation today, and I hope that I get to speak to your pet parents again in the future.
Oh, we will. I will be coming for you. I'll be looking for you later down the road. So for everybody that's listening, thank you so much for listening today. I hope this will help alleviate some of your concerns and give you some knowledge for making a good decision for your pets, because the bottom line is we want to have an experience where our pets enjoy their time while we're gone, and that we can go on our trips and focus on the enjoyment that we're getting and not worrying about our pets the whole time that we're gone. And I would love to hear your thoughts by commenting on the show or coming to visit us in the Pet Parent Insiders group. If you have any thoughts on boarding and daycare or your experiences, we'd love to hear your stories. So thanks again for listening, and we will see you again next week. Thanks for listening to the Pet Parent Hotline. If you enjoyed the show, don't keep it to yourself. Text a friend right now with a link and tell them I've got a show that you need to hear, and ask them to let you know what they think. And remember, your pet's best life starts with you living yours. So be sure to take good care of yourself this week and your pets.